Okay, hi Darren, how are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Colin. Nice to see you again.
Yes, and here we go. We're going to have one of our great conversations about truth today. And although this is the first in the series, of course, a person can come at any time and see the range of subjects we're going to be talking about. So we don't know when they're going to drop into the series. Hopefully, there's going to be a lot of different subjects.
Yep.
But we kind of need to say each time a couple of things, don't we? Like who we are, where we're from, what we're doing. So we'll do the short version of it, so it doesn't take up too much time. We have a common love in the truth, respecting what's been discovered in the past, but also still active seekers, trying to discover more, trying to connect more. And so we found out useful things along the way that we decided we're going to share. And it's also an extension of the Ruby Mountain series of work that other people who would like to come into the studies of things that we have found out to be useful can also participate in. And they can find out more about that on www.rubymountain.org. And so we're both from New Zealand, right? Even though I've got there Brazil, I'm almost half Brazilian. It's almost half my life in Brazil, but Darren and I met each other in New Zealand a long time ago.
Yes, a long time ago now.
So, of course, it's kind of, well, there's something else to say, isn't there? Which is that we're not of any particular denomination, any religious denomination. We love the idea of coming at this study from a neutral platform and being free to recognize and integrate different truths as they've appeared in different cultures and different times and different places. Because we're in such a fortunate age, we can literally scan over the whole of world history, the whole of the globe, and see where major truths have appeared and start to work them together. Whereas when people lived at that time in China 2,000 years ago, for example, that was the only access they had, was it to that particular religion or philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have this amazing opportunity to do what we're doing, actually.
And I think that's very much part of these current times as well, that with the last few hundred years of study into all the different branches of science and technology and all the rest of it, there's now an awareness, globally of trying to take all of that knowledge and all those different ways of looking at things and sort of synthesizing that back to some sort of cohesive whole. Because you know how it is at the moment, if you've spent 20 or 30 years training as a physicist and you sit down and have a cup of coffee with a biologist, I mean, it's difficult to even talk because the language is different, the terminologies are different. So you've got to get past that first to even be able to start to share what you've discovered from each respective field. So, this is another passion that we have, is, really trying to bring together and to understand the major truth behind all of that in relevance to the times in which we live, because it's obviously a time of great change, probably greater change than ever before in history.
Yeah. And we both use this term major truth. So just to explain what we mean by that to anybody listening. Major truth, we're using this term to mean things in the universe, qualities, laws, dynamics, that as far as we can see, and as far as even science can confirm, are eternal as far as we know. So constant, unchanging, and these major truths have a way of turning up in all the philosophies, all the religions,
for sure,
in the human biology and the human in nature and everything. And we're comparing that, we're separating that terminology of major truth out from minor truth. Minor truth is still a truth because it's existing and appearing within major truth, but it's a temporary truth. It might even be a small distortion of some truth, but nevertheless it's appeared. So you can say, for example, as a very simple example, you mentioned this last time we spoke, Darren, about, I think, was it butter and margarine in New Zealand?
Yes. Yeah, well,
and it was promoted as a healthy thing, then it was changed to margarine, and then it's changed back to butter. These are the kind of movements of minor truth. Who's popular, who's famous, it changes. So these are changing truths.
Well,
but what's the truth now in New Zealand? Is it butter or margarine?
Yeah, well, now you can choose, because the market's flooded with both.
It's balanced out, is it?
But another great example, of course, is DDT. This was the great insecticide to kill all the bugs so that more food could be grown, and it was the wonder cure of the time. But of course, a decade later, it turned out to be the most dangerous thing and banned, and you're not allowed to use it. And I even remember seeing on a documentary the man in the US government, it was his job to promote DDT. And he used to carry around a little box of the stuff. And he'd say, it's harmless, it's perfectly harmless, look. And he'd eat some of this DDT to prove to people how harmless it was. I must one day check out what happened to him in the end, but I can't imagine it would have done him any good.
Yes.
Yeah, because at the time, that was the truth. This was the wonder substance, and it didn't harm anybody. And then within a decade, it was the absolute opposite.
Yeah.
So that's the thing about minor truth, isn't it? It's always shifting and changing. It's never stable.
Yeah, and it's no coincidence that when people began to move out of rural areas into cities at the time of the Industrial Revolution, this is when there was a surge in mental health issues. In fact, it's been documented that in cities that had industries, the mental health problems were much higher. And this is not the only, but one of the reasons I think this is such a vital subject and a good subject to begin our series with.
Yes.
Because there's another surge happening now. Mental health issues are going through the roof. There's a demand that can't be met currently with people suffering mental health problems. Apparently 4 out of 10 people are suffering anxiety or symptoms of depression in America, which is a nice way of saying half of the people, almost half of the people. That's incredible. So for every 2 friends you have, or 3 friends, or 4 friends, or 5, almost half are having some sort of problem. And that's the ones that they've documented. That's the ones that are officially recorded. Suicide has now become the second major leading cause of death for young people. It's now surpassed homicide. Yeah. So you're more danger with yourself than wandering the streets and being killed by somebody else. That's what that's saying. What's happening in one's own head and emotionally. And why this move from the rural to the city started this wave of mental health issues, and I believe it's the same reason today, is there was a movement away from nature. Mm-hmm. So when they're in nature, when people were close to nature, they could see the stars and the moon and the sun, and there was a closer proximity to nature's ways and laws, and therefore major truth, eternal truth, as well as the energies therein. And when we moved into man's world, for all the conveniences that we got, there was a separation occurring. And of course, we know it. Now it's taken another step into not only industry, but the technological age with all these fast moving things. And it's, you go somewhere in nature and people are sitting there, but they'll have the cell phone. So that the disconnect is almost constant now.
Yeah, and I think that's, it's a very good example as well, because watching a sunrise last week, it's the same sunrise that people saw 1,000 years ago. The seasons of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, that's never changed. And there's a much greater emphasis in the past placed on being in harmony. Well, in many ways, people didn't have a choice, because if you didn't if you didn't plant in the spring, there'd be no crop to harvest in the summer. They actually, in some parts of the world, not in New Zealand because we're sort of surrounded by countryside and farms, but they have to take children on a special trip to a farm so they see where milk actually comes from, because in their minds it just comes from the supermarket. And once again, 20 different brands to choose from. I'm not sure what it's like in Brazil, but in New Zealand, even when you get to the milk section, there's the different companies' brands, but within that there's calcium milk, there's light milk, there's extra fat milk, and now there's this new one that they have where it's not pasteurized. It's like going back to a previous time.
Yeah,
just so much.
And it's amazing. And so what happens is, our synapses form up by what we're observing and the patterns and sequences we're seeing. So what happens is a person sees a sequence of things that's fragmented. So video games and jumping subjects and jumping channels and jumping everything. Inside our brains, that is causing disconnected synapses and a kind of sequence that's nothing to do with these bigger cycles of life. Then later, when those external influences aren't there, that same fragmentation is in the brain and a person has trouble thinking. And the next thing that happens is whatever they got interested in has now shifted out of fashion, and there's no relevance anymore to those synapses. And anybody listening to that person will just think, well, they're talking, something from the past, something irrelevant. And so this is where the mental health problems come in, because how do you get stability? How do you get stillness in the mind, stillness in the emotions, peace? So soon anxiety, soon depression, because nothing seems to be building, nothing seems to be going anywhere.
Yeah, and within that, it's just so easy to be completely disconnected from reality, anything that's real. I had a friend when I was 16. We had a group of friends, and we'd only just started to get cars. You can get your own car and you can drive around. And we used to hang out with my mate Gary. He had I think it was a Mark I Escort, had mag wheels. It looked quite nice. But we were having a conversation one night after dinner, and there'd been a serious car accident, head-on car accident just outside the flat where he lived. So he'd obviously been thinking about this, and we got to talking about, well, what would you do if you saw a car suddenly coming towards you? And he said, I know what to do. And we all went, oh, what's that? He said, I'd rip on the handbrake, spin the car around so it hit me at the back of the car, and then I'd be a lot less likely to be injured. And I thought, wow, this is brilliant. So I asked him, where do you go to practice this? Because I'm going to practice it as well. He said, I've never practiced it. I'm just going to do it when the time. And of course, that there's a major truth about how the human system works. Unless you practice something over and over again, it's not going to become a reflex action. But it's just so easy to have a random idea. It's the minor truth area.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating subject, because I think everybody wants to know the truth. So this thing called, what's it called? Kinesiology?
I think it's kinesiology, yeah.
Test the muscle. You can even do it on yourself if you put your fingers like that and test the strength of your own fingers by pulling apart. One of the curiosities in there is if you say to yourself a truth, your fingers or your arm will be stronger, and you can try it with a friend. If you say a non-truth, let's say I say my name is Fred, the muscle gets weak, and even you can test it on yourself, the muscle gets weak. If you say your name, my name is Colin, strong. Try it with your age, try it with where you live. But it's not often with truths like this, it's not often the truth itself, which is interesting, but what that says, what something says, what it implies, because that implies that when we have some truths, it gives us strength, it gives us force. And so again, the opposite is true. When you're collecting a lot of non-truths, sooner or later, often immediately, it's going to cause a weakness, it's going to cause debilitation. So there's many different reasons why this ongoing search for truth is so precious.
Yes, and I think I've got an example here, a slide I've put together, because this has been one of the major themes and searches throughout all of history. This is the other interesting thing about it. It's not just a couple of guys that come up with this. And really and it's interesting too, because this is one of the laws of nature, this duality, daytime, nighttime. Summer is the opposite to winter, spring is the opposite to autumn, quite different processes. But this duality of major and minor truth, one of the places we can see it is in ancient Greece. So, and that was to do with the sophists and the Platonists. Because the sophists, that's where the word sophistry comes from, and we know that means something unnecessarily complicated and difficult to understand. And what goes with the sense of that is it's deliberately done, so it is difficult to understand, which the sophists actually consciously did and created. So perhaps we could have a look at that and just unpack this a bit more about this trace to do with major and minor truth through history.
Yeah. Just to say, Darren, that it's minor truth is easy to see because it's all the things that are popular or appear, and then they move on. Then the truth of that thing passes. You could put subjective truth in there, opinions.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's an abundance of those. Everybody's got an opinion about everything. But deep down, we're still searching for truth. Everybody wants to know what the truth of the situation is. And we do know some truths. Some truths go on and on. And one of them that turns up in all the religions, for example, is the law of polarities. Just to give an example of a major truth. So the law of duality, the law of polarities, the law of two, day and night, up and down, left and right, cold and hot, and all those things. Sometimes it's like we can't see the forest for the trees. This is such an obvious truth that people kind of go, yeah, yin yang, sing the symbol, been there, got the t-shirt. But again, what it says, the implication of it is not thoroughly investigated. So it'd be great to see some slides so we can open it up more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this idea of major and minor truth, it's not a new idea. There's a whole trace through human history to do with this. And a good example are the sophists from ancient Greece, about 500 BC. And they were wandering professional teachers. They didn't have schools like we know of them. And what they taught was that truth was relative. There were no absolutes, and it differed between cultures and people and times. And therefore, the value of any truth or understanding was its practical implications. Really, the personal thing, how it was useful to you and your career or whatever, your political ambitions or whatever you're setting out to do. And really, from that standpoint, their idea was that because you experience the world through your five senses, experience was totally subjective and different for every individual. So these teachers then formulated ideas about how the universe worked and how nature worked, but they all had a different idea. So all these different teachers were teaching different ideas. It became very confusing and a bit of a mess, really, because it was this minor truth idea. It was very subjective and very individual, and nothing sort of eternal or major or reliable about it.
Which, just to say, by the way, is not wrong in itself. Like,
No.
A person does have a subjective truth. We're all living a particular perspective, and we feel what we feel, and we can even think what you like. But the major truth question comes in is, doesn't matter what you think, the sun is going to rise tomorrow. Doesn't matter what you think, you need your heart beating. And
That's right.
It's funny when a person has all these theories, but when they go to when they go to the doctor, they want to make sure that their heart's at a certain rhythm, that the pulse, all these checkups that we have, we're kind of running back to major truth as quickly as we can, just to make sure everything's all right.
Yeah.
If that major truth system is not all right, we're in trouble.
The sophists were part of the Hellenic Greek period, which is ancient Greece. So they didn't follow with the idea that there was a divine truth and a major cause behind things. They took this minor truth thing and made it into a major philosophy. Another good example, just on what you were touching upon there, and I mean, it sounds ridiculous till you really think about it, that you can have whatever view and subjective personal truth you like, but you try flapping your arms and flying. Now, you can do it with a hang glider and you can do it in an aeroplane, but human arms won't make you fly. So, and we have this in history as well, where people think they could fly and jump off a tower, and then they discover major truth very, very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So then counterbalance, this law of two, this polarity, like a pendulum swinging. In response to that, in the time of Plato, their whole endeavor was looking back into the major truth of things. And what he taught was that behind the surface forms of the world, there was a core idea or form, or the term he used was essence to encapsulate all of that. That all of that, behind all of that, is a major truth that all of that comes out of. So one might think that's obvious, but you had two completely different schools of thought. And the interesting thing in history, they almost weave like a double helix, where one becomes dominant, then the other takes over. And really into our modern time, it's the minor truth that seems to have a much greater impact and influence on the world than major truth, which is part of why we think this is so important. It's a really good place to start, is going back to look at those major truths.
Yeah, and of course the Greeks pulled a lot of those major truths out of ancient Egypt, right?
Absolutely.
Which was already in its decline. But one of the reasons ancient Egypt keeps popping up is they were obviously a civilization that, at least at one time, further back you go, they tried to base as much as they could on major truths. So you think of things like Pythagoras studying 21 years in Egypt, or 22 years, and he would have been in there studying major truths, which still appeared in his esoteric school, in his teaching, but how that's declinted now to children studying how to work out the sides and the lengths of a triangle, and the Pythagorean. It's like it doesn't, somehow the idea of a Pythagorean triangle and it's the formulas around it we know it's moved away from some major truth that wouldn't have been what he learned in ancient Egypt. I was thinking also the example of the Hippocratic Oath, because Hippocrates, he studied in Amenhotep's temple. A lot of other Greek people like Galen also studied in that particular temple, and he came out with the law of four, which he converted into the four humors, the medicine of the four humors, which was based on the law of four, which was based on the law of four, and that went on until 19th century. But that's already been kind of superseded. And whether true or not, there might have been some base in truth. What's interesting is doctors until today still have their oath, the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm. And it's funny, some truths fall away and other truths continue because everybody can agree to that truth.
Yes.
Which is not a kind of scientific truth, but a sentiment truth, a service truth, a human quality truth. So, yeah, as you say, things come and things go. We tend to rush back to major truths at time of importance. And when we're kind of in times of luxury, people start to spread out into minor truths and details.
Yes, and I think, this is one of the sort of searches of our times, really. I think that pendulum swinging back, that, you know, people are looking for and are interested in major truth once again, to make sense of everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So a good example of this Platonic view of major truth is that, you know, think of how many different types of tables there are in the world: glass tables, metal, wood, 3 legs, 4 legs, an infinite variety. And, you know, right now some people in the world somewhere are making tables and designing a new look, all the different materials. But what Plato was saying is that that's like an example of minor truth. They're all true. You know, the tables exist, they're real, but it really comes out of the essence, or what's sometimes referred to as the archetype of tables, because even if it has 3 legs instead of 4, they have to be geometrically balanced, otherwise the table's not going to stand up. You know, it's based in the function of something. So a table has a function. You know, it's not a hat, it's not a car that you drive, it's not something you eat with. It has a particular time. And so there are parameters where if that extends too far, it's actually not a table anymore. It's something else. And, you know, this is very important. It's at the level of minor truth where things can be distorted and mixed and to become something else altogether, which, you know, comes back to the mental health ideas that, you know, it's a common pattern in the world today where humans are bombarded with so much shifting minor truth. It's hard to anchor yourself in something real and reliable and permanent.
Yeah.
So you can take that example, apply it to anything you like. There's the essence or the core major truth of something, and then there's the outplay of all the different variations and permutations of that.
And the function, as you say. Tempting to start talking about language, because the word tables is by anagram is stable, which is an essential feature of a table, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's a really good example. Yeah, very good example.
Yes, Colin, that point you made about these laws, and of course they're based in nature, because when you think about it, all the branches of science and the arts and language and everything really comes back to this studying nature. That's all there was to study way back in time. And it was these major truths that people started to discover and unlock. And so, I mean, I wish it had a more fancy name. Sometimes it's called the tetrad, or the law of 4, we often refer to it. But here are just some examples from out of history, out of different times, out of different cultures.
Yeah, and you would add in there the yin-yang symbol, and, you know, because although it looks like it's 2 parts, there's really 4 parts to a yin-yang symbol.
Yes, the top left-hand corner there, these are the 4, they represent the 4 Egyptian creator gods, and that's found in a temple at Abu Simbel in Egypt. And it's interesting.
They're at the end of a very long corridor, and just twice a year, I think it's on the solstice, and the sun rises on the horizon and the light shines down this corridor and lights up those 4 figures. Just for that time, just for a few minutes.
And you got the canopic jars there, eh?
The 4 canopic jars, yes, absolutely. And it's that thing, there's not 5 or 7, it's 4. And, you know, building a temple where this light shines on these 4 divinities, that's a lot of trouble to go to. It must have been very, very, very important. And that's the thing with all of these examples, is that really they're examples of artwork where someone's gone to a lot of trouble to try and express that major truth, to try and, you know, offer a clue and a signpost that, you know, look to these things for major truth to make sense of things. And of course we have, the 4 seasons of the year, that these were always revered in past ancient cultures. And the bottom left, that's the doorway to Chartres Cathedral in France. And you have the figure of the divinity, but around those are the 4, well, they call them the Tetramorphs. That's the example of these powers or these influences that turn up in 4.
Yeah, like Ezekiel's vision of the bull, the bird, the lion, and the human.
That's right. Yeah.
Originally the snake, but sometimes appears as a human.
Yes, and in the top right-hand corner, that's a page from an illuminated manuscript, an illuminated Bible, the ancient book of Kells. And you have the 4 Tetramorphs, once again, the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the human.
Right.
But they, in this art, and it's so beautiful, someone's gone to so much work to create that, but these represent the 4 Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So there's this interesting connection between something quite familiar in Western culture, but connecting back to ancient Egypt and this line of history where this law of 4, this major truth of nature, is embedded and is a part of their understanding about how the world works and the human place within it.
Yeah. And even though these might look a little bit antiquated to somebody, I mean, it comes down to, our whole life is embedded and is moving with the law of 4, this cyclic thing. Today, nobody argues with biorhythms, for example. And the whole point of the law of 4, the seasons and all these, is that something is full, it empties, which is the second stage, although it's hard to say at which point it starts. Then it actually empties, gets to its lowest point, like winter. Then it starts to rise again, like spring, and then it's at its fullest again, like summer, drops again, autumn, and around it goes. And it's the same with everything. Even a conversation goes through those phases.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my favorite examples, because it just floored me when I first read it, because I was looking for examples of the law of 4, and it's the 4 parts of digestion, which is ingestion, digestion, assimilation, and excretion. And the lovely thing about this is, it's like a wheel, all motors, the 4-stroke engine, it all works on this law of 4 principle. If you have a problem with any one of those 4 things, it shuts the system down. So you can have plenty to eat and the digestion is fine, but if the exhaust or the excretion part of it is blocked, you're going to get ill quite quickly. And of course, as you just said, Colin, it's exactly the same mentally. You learn something, or even in a conversation, it goes through those 4 processes. And I'm sure most people have noticed that you have an interesting conversation, but it might be the next day or a couple of days later. It's like you've been digesting and assimilating it, and then oh, wow, yeah, no, I see what they were on about. Or you put the pieces of the puzzle together to come to a new understanding yourself. That this is the mental process. It's 4-fold.
And because it's part of a wheel within wheels within wheels, again, that comment earlier that when people used to live close to nature, I mean, most of the population was in nature, working with nature. Then it inverted. Most of the population moved to the city around the time of the Industrial Revolution. In nature, you're going to see that cycle, right? You're going to see a seed germinate, out comes the plant, produce a fruit within another seed. And this cycle, what is it going to cause in the mind? Stability, constancy, regularity, flow. And these are things that people long for. They want that, because when you talk about mental problems, the first question that comes up is mental instability.
Yeah.
Anxiety indicates a lack of stability. So these things like the law of 4, although it can seem a little bit abstract when you think about civilizations in the past, it's happening right now. Everything's in this motor. And as you say, if one part breaks, then the whole system gets blocked. It's working fine in the universe, working fine on the planet, but as we've become disconnected, unless we contemplate these things, we can arrange our personality, for example, to be very spring-like and not realize that contemplative times that have an autumn type nature are also perfectly natural.
Yes. Well, there's a lovely example of the understanding of this where the ancient Egyptians used to have a practice where they'd make a box in the shape of Osiris, which was the god of resurrection and rebirth and renewal. And they would fill that with soil.
Wheat seeds in them.
So when the rains came and it was springtime, you had this form of Osiris
with green wheat. Lush.
And they were making this connection, because there's another major truth, because that's the same truth for all humans that have ever lived, whether 1,000 years ago or 2 years ago or in the future. We appear here, we're born, we go through a certain cycle, and there's 4 in that, isn't it? The birth, the youth, middle age, old age, and then another phase. This was part of the idea with Osiris. The Egyptians knew with their advanced natural science that life was not necessarily one appearance, that it was the beginning of another life, and that's based in major truth.
Yeah. You said you had some examples of law of 6 also. We're calling these law of 2, law of 4, law of 6, because basically the number system is a system of laws, isn't it? 1 through to 9 is a system of laws. So we're kind of picking out a few as examples of major truth.
Yeah, Egypt is another good example, because they had 9, they called it the Ennead of the gods, and we use the term God, but that wasn't their understanding. They saw those as major truth principles and laws that existed right throughout the universe and saturated human life as well.
In fact, we get our word for nature from the ancient Egyptian word for the gods, these 9 gods that you mentioned, the Neteru. So
yes.
It's very interesting in this search for truth. Sometimes you can't look around you, sometimes you can't look forward. You've got to trace back and try to get to the core of things.
Yes, I've got some interesting examples here of this law of 6.
Yeah, great.
So I mean, that's something I'm particularly interested in, is artwork and sculpture throughout a history, because I think, there's an old saying, isn't there? I think it's Chinese, that a single picture is worth 10,000 words. And so art's been used in the past to capture understandings about major truth. And so you can see in this slide here, these are examples of the hexagram, or the law of 6, expressed in symbology and artwork and architecture through different cultures, different civilizations throughout different times in history. And, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's some corporation's logo, because it's interesting when you look at logo design, nearly all the most powerful and effective ones often come back to, it's the law of 2, or it's triangular, it's the law of 3. Think how many company logos have a pentagram in them, that have a star in them. So This is also this idea of tapping into the power of major truth, even at the level of making your corporate branding and logo more effective, penetrating into people's unconscious.
And here's a truth then, that, it turned up around the world, turned up in religion, turned up in different epochs that didn't know about each other. And so you're talking about, we're looking at a major truth. I mean, the seal of Solomon is the central symbol for the Jewish nation, right? So there's a major truth. But if you ask somebody, if you talk to somebody and say, okay, I'm going to put on the table a major truth that is absolutely essential, and you drew this, how much could a person actually say about it? What's the relevance a person would feel to their own life? And yet at some time in the past, there was a incredible relevance understood about this, which is just an example of how far we've moved away from major truth, and we're really basing our lives on minor truth, because a person could talk for hours about the latest series they're watching on TV. But when you talk about a major truth like the law of 4 or the law of 2 or the law of 6, or maybe a universal quality like care, suddenly there's not that much to say, or maybe nothing at all. So that's the importance of this study, right? That's the importance of these conversations.
Yes.
Yes.
So with this example on screen here, we're looking at a collection of snowflakes, because no two snowflakes are ever the same. And, you know, that's a lot of snowflakes when you think through the centuries,
That's
through
a
the
lot of
millennia.
snowflakes.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. But the
It is.
interesting thing is there's something to do with snowflakes and frozen water that it always configures to this hexagramic star type pattern.
Right.
And I think why that's also a lovely example, we go back to the Plato view about major truth and about essence. He gave the example, well, there's one of the examples he gave of the tables, and he obviously gave many others, but those were man-made things. That the deeper truth inside of that is that he was saying that nature, which man hasn't created, nature works by the same principle of laws, these laws. So the humans haven't made snowflakes. This is something about the natural worlds that always configures snowflakes to 6. And there's so many examples. If you look at the shape of 5 or the star or the pentagram in flowers and starfish and different cellular arrangements.
I was just thinking, you know, you could have an image here of all these different types of people from, you know, Eskimos to Zulus to all races, all religions, and they'd all be configured to the 5-fold.
Very good. Yes. Yeah, very good. Yes, and what you just said, Colin, I think is a really, really good example of why major truth is important, because, you know, without going into it, you think of the trouble in the world from all the different types of humans and different ways of living, the conflict, but inside of that, at the very core major truth, we're all human.
Yeah.
And we didn't make, you know, our mothers and fathers might have had a part to play in it, but that thing of conception and the human forming and growing to that 5-fold pattern, you know, they say that if you took the liver from person from one part of the world and a liver from another, you know, a liver expert would have a hard job telling whose it was. They could do DNA analysis and find out, but at that major level, there's so much that's unifying with the human form and what motivates it, and, you know, this search for truth and understanding about what is it really all about.
Yeah, and it opens up the subject of qualities, which is another one of the themes in Ruby Mountain, because any culture, any time in history, any race, any religion, somebody arrives at your door cold, tired, hungry.
Yes.
They need warmth, they need something to drink, they need something to eat, behind which is care and kindness and consideration. And everybody's moved, everybody's touches, everybody wants those things.
Yes.
So it's not just about the functionality of the mechanical part of the laws, which is fascinating in itself, the law of 2, law of 3, law of 4, but the human qualities, which are really extensions of universal qualities, because they also appear in the animal kingdom. They appear between nature itself and organic life. And you'd have to extend that to the universe, because there's incredible balances that imply some sort of consideration, some sort of care, unless you opt to think it's a big mistake, of course, a big accident.
Now, I think with this slide is a very good example, again, of major and minor truth. And it's a real stunner to do with what's beyond or just behind the surface levels of things which we take for granted, you know, like our bodies and being alive. It's very easy to get familiar with that. But there was something around the time of 2000 that was called the Human Genome Project. And what the scientists were doing was actually analyzing every bit of DNA in the human body. And what they were able to do with the computer technology of the time was then convert that into the letters. You know, the DNA is made up of those 4 base chemicals, but they're in specific orders, like a language. So they were able to, and it took years. It was an almost impossible task, but they managed it. Eventually, they were able to publish the full genome sequence, the exact code of all the human DNA. And you can see in the slide in the middle, there's one volume, because they actually printed it out. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see how small the type is that they had to print it out and to fit it all in. But on the right-hand side is a man looking at one volume. That complete library, that complete bookshelf is all of the human DNA printed code, printed out at that size.
Wow.
And every cell. So latest estimate is you have about 30 trillion cells in the average human body.
Yeah.
And every cell is that library of coded information. Exact. You know, you can't change one sentence in that book, otherwise the human form is not going to turn out.
You said something earlier when we chatted about it too. You also mentioned that they were looking for a kind of reason why people got sick within this, like there was going to be some sort of central factor. Can you tell us about that again?
Yes, it was part of the motivation, because it started off as a publicly funded project and that was going too slow. So a private corporation got involved because they thought, wow, we can find the cure to every disease and ailment and problem that human beings have. We can patent each one, we'll be billionaires, you know. So they privately put money, which got the project finished. But the great mystery was that they were not able to find that. And they had to admit that those sorts of things they were looking at are not actually found in the DNA. They must be somewhere else in the process of the human system. So they added enormously to the volumes of minor truth and knowledge in the world, but that major truth they were looking at, which was the cause of all diseases and ailments in the human form, it's not in the DNA. It wasn't where they were looking. It lies somewhere else. Yeah.
It's incredible. When you think also nobody's going to read this, it's the total, it's a total mystery. Like every answer, this is what part of what we have to accept in the search for truth. You know, there are amazing things you discover, amazing things to understand, a lot of help, personal help, a lot of understanding. But there's other things that just lead to greater mysteries, like how much was pumped in for the appearance of the human.
Yes, and you know, this is the thing about what's universal, or rather than use the word common, what's universal to all humans, is it seems to be inbuilt somewhere in all of that puts the human together to seek the truth, to try and understand. You know, that's really what history is. It's the results of humans right back through the ages, trying to understand why they're here, what's important to know, what's not important to know. And this is why major and minor truth is such an excellent lever into that, to you know, bring things down to earth, to make it more simple, to get a grasp on it. And, you know, that gives you some kind of home base with which to keep coming back to, which I think, you know, as you mentioned earlier, Colin, is absolutely essential to the mental health and the well-being, is to have some solid core to come back to and to work out from, which is what teachers like Plato and Leonardo da Vinci and Lao Tzu, the famous Chinese philosopher, this was the big message. Base yourself in these core laws, which are part of nature that humans haven't created. And in that is the sanity and the nutriment and the well-being that belongs with the human, because they're naturally meant to be together.
And a very simple starting place, anybody watching this and finding it intriguing, is to get a piece of paper and a pen and draw a dividing line down the page and start writing out minor truths, like things that are temporary, true, but an opinion. And of course, there's no end to it, but it's good to start getting some territories like politics and who's running a country and fashion and all these types of things. Quite a lot of science even goes in there, because science are changing their view and theory on how things are. If you think about how many people believe the world was flat, it was a fact, you know, 1,000 years ago, and now nobody believes it. So on the other side, major truths, and there are these laws, there are qualities, there's the electromagnetic spectrum and the electromagnetic worlds, the energy worlds, which is why we bring them in very quickly into the Ruby Mountain studies. So we have to start winding up, Darren. Just to say again, if anybody's watching and intrigued by this, go to the site, www.rubymountain.org, or get in touch with us and see and find out more about what we do, what we study. We've got a lot to share whilst we ourselves continue on the journey of research and discovery.
Yep.
But we thought a nice way to wind up is one of these major truths expressed in a particular time, a particular place, which is really the law of two. And of course, one of the confusions is people call the same truth by different names at different places.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So you get, over here it's seasons, and over here it's biorhythms, and over here it's the tetramorph, but they're talking about the law of four.
Yeah.
So that would be a great way to finish, Darren, if you wouldn't mind reading through this expression of the law of two.
Yeah, sure. Okay, this is a writing from the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, and he lived in China in the 6th century BCE. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of 10,000 things. Ever desireless, one can see the mystery. Ever desiring, one can see the manifestations. These two spring from the same source, but differ in name. This appears as darkness, darkness within darkness, the gate to all mystery. Lao Tzu.
So often when a person hears or sees a major truth, they get touched very deeply, don't they?
Yeah.
They know there's something about that, but unless we make a conscious decision to become in pursuit of these truths, we tend to be moved back into minor truths pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So it's great to stop, as we've done now, to stay focused on it for some time. And it's always good to talk to you, Darren. Thank you for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. It's a great topic. And
come to Brazil sometime.
I would like to. It's so cold. It's winter here at the moment. Yeah, so this is the first of the series, and we have a whole list of amazing and fascinating subjects of a similar vein to get into the deeper core aspects of things, which we'll be working on.
Yes.
Watch this space.
Okay, so.
All right. Thank you, Colin.
Okay, so we'll see you again soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.